Okay, so these guys are essentially my heroes. I mean, the two prominent gentlemen in this band, Steve Maxwell von Brown and Jeff Green, they didn't give a damn. They figured we're going to make the exact music we want to make. We don't care. There were no insecurities. Their optimism was limitless apparently, and I would like to live my life the way these chaps were in Australia in the 70s during a time when apparently, see, pre-internet, the one cool cultured place in Australia was Melbourne, seemingly. Sydney was catching up. Sydney seemed to be a few years behind in terms of film festivals and science fiction cons and things like that once the internet arrived, and by the 1990s things were kind of up to speed. But Cybotron were operating in a kind of city which was, totally, thinking ahead, which, prior to the internet, this was just not commonplace, I believe. Certainly not in this country, unfortunately. But Cybotron makes me feel, wow, if that just limitless, free, shameless experimentation, this kind of just will to go forward and to, in the nicest way possible, do what thou wilt without getting too Anton LaVey-ian. It's this extraordinary mood experience. Like, this is one of my favorite things to place on in any context. Like, even if I'm playing it around someone my age, I can, we're going on a car trip with some nice person I've met, and I can go, hey, mind if I place this on? These guys, this was composed in 1976, and they go, oh wow, like, how could 70s technology have made this? This is really interesting, Don't get me wrong, you have to be on good terms with the person first, it's not first date stuff, it's like seventh date stuff, maybe. It's your first road trip sort of stuff, The point I'm trying to make is, what would have felt more exciting than to be aware of this group in the 70s, or even better, to have been with this group as they were recording this in the 70s? That's where I want to be. If any recording act has made me proud to be Australian, it is Cybotron. Absolutely. They had the intention of composing, I suppose, these progressive rock soundscapes, but what it winds up sounding like to us now with these Tangerine Dream, or these krautrock-esque experiments, it's extraordinary that very few groups were making music like this in 1976. It was extremely uncommon. It was not very commercial at all. Brian Eno had, released discrete music the previous year, and, ambient music was yet to be even coined as a term. That would have been, I guess, 78 popularly. And listen to this album. Aren't there traces and touches of contemporary music trends from the 90s onwards all over this album? Listen to the second track, Mumbo Jumbo, and think about the patterns of the drum machines, the percussion. Gee, does that remind you of the mid-late 2010s at all? I suspect it does. If any album makes me feel as though I know what impulses to follow in my brain, and it can wind up being a good result, it's like those feelings where you trusting yourself is an odd thing. I can imagine the Cybotron guys had no other choice but to trust themselves. The fact that it results in a work such as this makes me feel as though, yep, trusting yourself, that's the way to go. Commerciality be damned. Now I'd like to read out the backstory the article of the Free Encyclopedia has for Cybotron, brackets, Australian band, because there's that American house music act as well. We're not going to talk about them today. Obviously, it's the Australian Cybotron. Cybotron were an Australian electronic experimental music band formed in 1975 by Steve Maxwell von Braun on synthesizer, electronic percussion. He's a German expat, by the way, and I guess his friends were sending him Tangerine Dream and Faust Records, or New, or whatever, and alto saxophone, and Jeff Green on keyboard, organ, and synthesizer. The group issued 3 studio albums, Cybotron 1976, Colossus 1978, and Implosion 1980, and disbanded by 1981. Australian musicologist Ian McFarlane noted that they were a bona fide experimental outfit, and the band's eponymous debut featured a mix of heavy synthesizer kinetics, organ drones, and pulsating electronic beats. Cybotron were formed in 1975 in Melbourne as an electronic experimental music band by Steve Maxwell von Braun on synthesizer, electronic percussion, and alto saxophone, and Jeff Green on keyboard, organ, and synthesizer. In 1975, Brown had issued his debut solo album, Monster Planet, with contributions from Green, Gil Matthews on drums, ex-Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, Henry Venal on electric violin, and Jim Keyes on lead vocals, ex-The Master's Apprentices. Australian musicologist Ian McFarlane described Cybotron as a bona fide experimental outfit. Cybotron released a self-titled album in 1971 on the Clear Light of Jupiter label, which contained mainly synthesizers and saxophone. It was recorded at Armstrong Studios with Brown and Green producing. They used the same personnel as for Brown's solo album. McFarlane noted that Cybotron featured a mix of heavy synthesizer kinetics, organ drones, and pulsating electronic beats. The group were influenced by Ashra Temple, Hawkwind, and Tangerine Dream. They created minimalist repetitive electronica similar to Kraftwerk's Autobahn, November 1974. Cybotron were pioneers of Australian electronic music with their version of krautrock, while the local music scene was dominated by pub rock. Pub rock is absolute garbage, by the way, just so we're all aware. Any non-Australians need not look into that world. Clearlight of Jupiter was owned by Jeremy Fiebiger, also owner of a record store, Pipe Imports, and two business partners, Daniel and Charlie O'Halloran. Fiebiger also managed Cybotron. Australian music journalist Andrew Fain described the group as absolutely brilliant, keyboard-dominated, late progressive band with a massive symphonic sound. A live album, Saturday Night Live, was issued in 1977 from an on-air radio broadcast on Free ZZ in Melbourne. Free double Z. Yeah, that live album is extraordinary. I've shared that before. I know someone liked it, and that's very... I hope either you were a Cybotron fan already, and that's awesome, or you were exposed to their music for the first time there, and wow, you must have had a wild time, I imagine. It was followed in 1978 by their second studio album, Colossus, with Colin Butcher joining to provide drums, percussion, and synthesizer. McFarlane felt it had a more progressive edge backed by a massive symphonic sound. AllMusic's Richard Foss noted they had hit a peak with Colossus, which benefited from the presence of drummer and synth player Colin Butcher. This album sold better in Europe and the USA as an import than it did in Australia, and for a few milliseconds it looked like the band might break internationally. I adore Colossus, but I ultimately just prefer the feel and the mood, the tone of this album. It's just preference, to be honest. In 1980, Brown and Green had split, with Brown recording Cybotron's third studio album, Implosion, which was issued on Cleopatra Records that year and included Mark Jones on bass guitar, and keyboards, and Matthews returning on drums and keyboards. McFarlane described it as having followed the symphonic route, but with a pop tinge to a couple of tracks. Eureka from Implosion was played on the United States college radio stations. By 1981, Cybotron had disbanded. Oh, here's the thing. Implosion was totally selling out. It was going for a commercial sound. I guess, at some point, Steve Maxwell von Brown, he was like, I'm a coward, to hell with it. We gotta try and make money. It's about money. Forget all the ideals. Forget it. And it's just like, you were conning on us with these ideals. It's like you conned your bandmates along these ideals for like how many years, and then you're like, no, we need to be commercial. It's just like, couldn't you have had that epiphany a little bit earlier, dude? It's absolutely infuriating, frankly. It's such an Australian pathos too. It's like let's do it. We need to do it. We need to follow the rules now. Because we might never be recognised. It's just like, who cares? Are we doing this for ourselves? Or are we doing this for recognition? It doesn't, like, everyone's going to be forgotten eventually. Like, recognition means crap, honestly. Anyway, from September 2002, Mark Woods remastered their albums for CD. Also that year, Green announced that Cybotron was in the process of recording new material. As of January 2009, this material was not released. Try as of April 2023. In January 2006, Cybotron's Implosion was re-released by Aztec Music in an expanded CD version with 5 of its bonus tracks from an incomplete and unreleased 4th studio album, Abbey Moore, planned for 1981. I'm not as familiar with those tracks, just because I don't care for Implosion as much. But maybe I ought to give those tracks a whirl. Maybe they're more experimental, but likely not. In August 2020, Brown released Return to Monster Planet. In December 2022, Green released Exodus to Genesis. Oh, that sounds fascinating. Maybe we ought to check some of those out in the future. But you see, when Cybotron were doing this in the mid-late 70s, there were no cliches in this genre/paradigm yet. Now it's nothing but cliches. You think it's not Tangerine Dream's fault they couldn't make any more interesting music after the mid-80s. Well, it kind of is, certain members left. But, like I've said this before about TD, it's like, there's only so much you're gonna do with that. Like, once you've abandoned the spiritual ideals, you go back into the studio and you're like, okay, so what do we do now? I guess we just mimic the last album and maybe it'll be as good. Well, it won't be. You're not going to be trying as hard. Like, you're not trying to make new worlds as you were when you had these lofty ideals. Say what you will about the lofty ideals, but for the very most part, these recording artists make a lot more interesting music when they have them. Money just makes music suck, and like, people aren't going to pay for albums anymore. In my opinion, if you want to become an artist of any kind, you have to be prepared to not make any or much money from what you're doing. Which isn't to say you ought to, starve yourself. I think you ought to, find a means to get by without having to devote too much time to a career and pretend to dedicate yourself to a job you're not interested in. You know, don't waste any employer's time if you don't have to, in my opinion. What I would say is, yeah, find an equilibrium, get by, and use the time you would have, the free time you would have, because you're not devoting yourself to a more extensive kind of business-oriented career, you know. Use that time to devote to your art if you feel so inclined. But don't try to make money off of it. It rubs people the wrong way, especially in this day and age. I mean, be open to the possibility of making money off of your art, you know. Put a small price tag on it if you have to. Have an Etsy store. Do whatever you need to do. It's just that your work is going to suffer for wanting to be for profit. You're just going to be making things to a formula and just kind of hoping for the best rather than, I don't know, getting creative. If there's a band that is making music because they want to be famous and not have as difficult jobs as they perceive, you know, the rest of the world's careers being, or if there's a group that, you know, they're in a band making music because they really do not want to do anything else, they have disdain for everything else, and they want to make music so badly that they've eschewed the possibility of making money from it and just want to put the music out there. Yeah, guess whose music I'd rather listen to? Whose music's going to be more interesting and unique and unfamiliar? If you're one of these young Australian jeans and t-shirt rock bands who just like, oh, we don't want a real job, we'll try and be big like Wolfmother got big, Jet got big in the 2000s, we'll try to be like that. Like, that's over. And even if that wasn't over, even if it was 2011 even, it's like, it's just so cynical and evil and ugly. Make the music you want to make, be fearless, and I know it's like, oh, but what about the money? You can find another means of income and just use that income to just get by, because then you can devote more time to this music rather than, again, what the full gamut of a career and the time you devote to a full career might be. And you might not be earning as much money versus, you know, just getting by on a lesser wage, or, you know, something that's more of a role than a career, if you will. But it's going to give you more time to the art if you're serious about it, and if you want to hone it and potentially make any money off of it, well, you've got all that free time to do so, don't you? So don't see art as a career, see art as an escape from a career. There's more to life than being an expectation for a generation or two of people who will probably be dead before you ever will be, so who cares really? Wash dishes in the evening, make music in the day, do what needs to be done. Follow the example of Cybotron 1976. I just want there to be good Australian music again, for goodness sake. Thanks everyone, have the best possible day and night you have ever possibly imagined or could imagine. Much appreciated.